The towering figure of Instructor Zorath loomed over the human recruit, a sneer curling on his face. His alien eyes glimmered with an unmistakable mixture of pity and amusement, like a predator watching a mouse struggle in a trap. He crossed, his arms, eyes scanning the puny recruit before him. "You, human," Zorath's voice rang out across the cavernous training hall, "will never be able to lift that weapon." The words were sharp, as cold as the metallic floor beneath their feet. "It's beyond you, it's beyond anyone." Before the recruits could react, the massive weapon was revealed, a towering, pulsating construct, the Helix Cannon, known throughout the galaxy as the weapon that no one could lift. A weapon so heavy, so incomprehensibly dense, that it had shattered even the most powerful of beings. No one, not even the most renowned warlords of the stars, had ever been able to wield it. And yet, here stood a human, alone, facing the impossible. The recruit, standing small and unassuming in the midst of the alien warriors, felt the weight of Zorath's words pressing down on him. He knew how they all saw him. Weak, incapable, and out of place. Human. He'd been told his entire life that he didn't belong among these celestial beings. There was no place for him here. But something inside him flickered, a pulse of stubborn defiance. This was his moment, the one moment where he could prove that being underestimated wasn't a death sentence. It was his chance to rise above it all, if he could. If only he had the strength. The audience was already on the edge of their seats, the air thick with anticipation. What if just once they were wrong about him? The vast training hall was a sight to behold. Towering columns stretching into infinity, their surfaces glimmering with the cold, metallic sheen of alien craftsmanship. Above, holographic displays flickered, presenting live data feeds from the galaxy's most prestigious training academies. The recruits stood in rows, their sharp, disciplined stances reflecting the pressure of the moment. Among them, the human recruit, Jason Hale, stood as an anomaly, a small, unremarkable figure against the towering beings around him. His presence felt like an intrusion in this world of elite warriors. His pulse raced as he stood there, aware of every skeptical glance cast his way. His introduction had been anything but subtle. The whispers had already started, spreading faster than the speed of light. The human? How did he even get here? What does he think he's doing? Jason's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't blind to the way the others looked at him, the way their eyes narrowed in disbelief at the mere thought of a human. Someone with soft hands, someone who had never faced a real battle, standing among the galaxy's finest. And then there was Zorath, the instructor, the living legend of war across the stars. The mighty Zorath who had crushed countless foes and earned the admiration of every race in the galaxy. To Jason, Zorath's mere presence was an overwhelming storm of power and expectation. "Human," Zorath's voice boomed, cold and unforgiving. "You're here to prove that you belong among the best. But I'll make it clear, this training is not for the weak. You think you can even touch the weapon?" His words were sharp, punctuated by the jeering laughs of the other recruits. Jason's eyes shifted to the side, where a towering structure loomed, the Helix Cannon. It was a monstrosity of war, an ancient weapon so massive that it defied comprehension. Even the sight of it seemed to bend the air around it, a distortion in space itself. There was no weapon like it in the galaxy. Its mass alone was enough to crush any being foolish enough to try and lift it. Not even the mightiest alien warlords could budge it. Yet here was Jason, asked to do the impossible. Zorath's smirk deepened as he pointed to the weapon. "Lift it. Show me that you have more than the human frailty that everyone expects." His words, like daggers, echoed in Jason's mind. Jason's fingers tightened around the cold metal of his gloves. The other recruits snickered and whispered behind him. He could feel their eyes on his back, their silent judgment settling like a heavy weight. The human recruit, the weakling. His hands trembled slightly, his body rigid with tension as he walked. Forward. This was it, the moment he had dreaded and yet longed for. He could either prove them wrong or confirm every single doubt they had. Taking a deep breath, Jason reached for the handle of the Helix Cannon, his fingers grazing its surface. The weight of it was almost incomprehensible, a pressure that seemed to seep into his bones, each second feeling heavier than the last. His grip tightened, and with a strained grunt, he pulled. Nothing happened. The weapon refused to budge. Jason's muscles burned, his body trembling under the strain. His chest heaved with exertion, but it was like trying to lift an entire mountain. The laughter from the other recruits was immediate, mocking and cruel, filling the air like a storm. Jason's heart sank. Zorath's voice rang out again, low and taunting. "Pathetic," he sneered. "You really think that you, a human, have what it takes? You are no more than a speck in this galaxy, a curiosity, nothing more." The words hit Jason like a slap across the face, the ridicule palpable in the air. For a moment, everything felt like it was crashing down around him. The weight of the weapon felt unbearable. The harsh laughter echoed in his ears. His vision blurred, and a creeping sense of doubt began to curl within him. The memories of every person who had ever told him he wasn't enough flooded his mind. He thought of his father, who had always pushed him to be stronger, to be better, only for Jason to fall short every time. He thought of the countless times he had been told that humans couldn't survive, let alone thrive, among the stars. And now, standing before the Helix Cannon, it felt like they were all right. He took a step back, his hands trembling, his breath ragged. The weight of the weapon still hung in the air around him, but he couldn't lift it. Maybe Zorath was right. Maybe he didn't belong here. Maybe he was never meant to be part of this. But then something shifted, a flicker of something deep. Within him, something that had been buried for so long, ignited. What if they were wrong? Jason's grip on the cannon tightened once more, the metal cold beneath his hands. The ridicule around him faded into a dull hum, and in its place, a deep, steadying resolve filled his chest. This wasn't just about lifting a weapon. This was about proving that humans were more than just what others saw on the surface. It was about defying the expectations, the limitations, the centuries of prejudice that had held him back. He wasn't going to be the weakling they all thought he was. With a sharp breath, Jason pulled once again, this time pushing past the pain, past the ridicule. The weight of the cannon seemed to shift, just slightly at first, but it was enough. His muscles screamed in protest, his body threatening to give out, but Jason didn't stop. Slowly, agonizingly, the cannon began to rise, if only an inch, but that inch was everything. The laughter from the recruits died down, replaced by a stunned silence. Even Zorath, standing with arms crossed, watched in disbelief. The energy in the room shifted, a crackling tension building like an approaching storm. For a brief moment, Jason locked eyes with Zorath, the teacher who had doubted him, who had called him weak. There was no smug grin on Zorath's face now. Instead, there was a flicker of something, surprise perhaps, or even admiration. But it was fleeting, quickly replaced by a calculating expression. Jason's breath came in ragged gasps. His vision was blurry, his body trembling with exhaustion, but he was determined. He wasn't going to fail. Not today. Then, just as the cannon seemed to hover, only slightly off the ground, it suddenly dropped with a deafening clang. The room held its breath. Jason's heart sank, but only for a moment. His hands burned, his entire body screamed in agony, but something else, something deeper, had shifted. He had shown them. For just that brief moment, he had proven that humans weren't to be underestimated. Zorath's eyes narrowed, a dangerous spark in them. "Well done, human," he said, the words almost mocking. "You almost succeeded, but almost isn't enough in my academy." He stepped forward, his tone shifting. "But I'm curious now, how far can you really push yourself?" Jason's heart pounded in his chest, the challenge hanging in the air. There was no turning back now. The clang of the heavy doors echoed throughout the vast training hall as the next phase of Jason's challenge began. The laughter from the previous attempt had long since died down, replaced by a tense, oppressive silence. The other recruits stood like statues, watching with narrowed eyes as Jason approached the Helix Cannon again. He could feel their gaze on his back, each one carrying the weight of skepticism, disdain, and worse, pity. He had already failed once, and failure, as Zorath had so cruelly pointed out, meant disgrace. Now, Zorath's voice was like a thunderclap, commanding and unforgiving. "You will try again. This time, lift it completely. Anything less, and you will be sent home." There was no compassion in his words, no leniency. The teacher's tone was cold, a reminder of the ruthless galaxy they inhabited. "Prove you're not a waste of our time." Jason's hands gripped the cold metal of the cannon once more, but this time the task felt impossibly harder. The weight that had seemed so daunting before now felt like an insurmountable mountain, an unyielding force. His muscles, already strained from his previous attempt, burned with an exhaustion he had never known. The challenge had shifted from a mere physical test to something far more personal. This time, it wasn't just the weapon weighing him down. It was his entire existence, a human, a weakling in a galaxy of untouchable power. And every recruit in the room knew it. The laughter from a few of the alien recruits began again, louder. This time, like a wave crashing against the walls. "Look at him struggle," one of them sneered. "He thinks he can play with the big boys. Pathetic." Another alien, a tall, muscular creature with glowing blue skin, chuckled. "Perhaps you should ask the humans back on Earth if they have anything stronger than this cannon," he mocked, causing a ripple of laughter to echo through the hall. Jason clenched his jaw, but said nothing. He couldn't afford to react, not now. Zorath's eyes glinted with amusement, watching from his perch like a king surveying his court. "This will be a lesson in humility," he muttered to himself, the words meant for Jason's ears. "A lesson in knowing your place." Jason felt every word hit him like a slap. He had never felt so small, so utterly out of place in his entire life. His body screamed in protest as he strained to lift the cannon again. Nothing, not even a twitch. The weapon didn't budge. The mocking laughter from the recruits filled the room again, and Jason's knees buckled slightly. He steadied himself, his hands white-knuckled on the cannon's cold surface. For a fleeting moment, doubt crept in. The oppressive weight of failure threatened to crush him, to bury him under the expectations of a galaxy that never believed in humans. What was he even doing here? His pulse quickened, and he felt the sting of humiliation biting at his spirit. But then, something shifted inside him. It was subtle at first, just a flicker of defiance. A memory, faint but vivid, surfaced, the faces of his family, his friends, his home. He thought of the countless sacrifices he had made to get here. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for all the people who had ever been told they weren't enough, for every human who had ever been underestimated. For every voice silenced by the powers that be. Jason's mind cleared, his resolve hardened. "I'm not a joke," he muttered under his breath, the words barely audible above the ridicule. "I'm not." With renewed strength he pulled again. His arms, aching and trembling with effort, felt like they might give out any second. The room held its breath. Then, just when all hope seemed lost, something unexpected happened. The weapon, so impossibly heavy, began to twitch. The tiniest of movements, but it was enough. Jason's heart skipped a beat as the weight seemed to shift. For the first time, it felt like the Helix Cannon was responding to him. It was as if his will was pushing against its resistance, forcing it to obey. The recruits watched in stunned silence. Even Zorath's usual smug expression faltered for a moment, but the weapon still didn't lift, not by any considerable amount. Jason's breath came in gasps, sweat pouring down his forehead as he continued to strain. His body was at its limit. The laughter from the recruits resumed, albeit quieter now, tinged with confusion. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Jason was still struggling, but there was something undeniably different in the air. He wasn't going to stop. He refused to. Zorath watched with narrowed eyes, a frown tugging at the corner of his mouth. The students around him murmured, exchanging glances. Jason's struggle was no longer the laughable spectacle it had been. The teacher's eyes darkened. This was no longer about the cannon. It was about defiance. About a human standing up against everything the galaxy believed. Jason took another step forward, his muscles screaming in agony, his body threatening to collapse. But he couldn't stop. Not now. He pushed with everything he had, and this time something deep inside, gave way. The weapon shifted, a little more. A collective gasp echoed through the room. For a brief, fleeting moment, the recruits stopped mocking. Some, like the blue-skinned alien, even stood still, eyes wide with disbelief. Jason's gaze was locked onto the cannon, sweat streaming down his face, his breathing harsh but steady. This wasn't about strength. It wasn't about pure physicality. This was something else, something more human. It was about willpower, about refusing to accept defeat even when every fiber of his being screamed that it was impossible. Zorath took a slow step forward, his usual confidence faltering as he looked at Jason, his jaw set tight. "What's happening?" His voice was barely a whisper, as though even he wasn't sure what to make of it. Jason didn't hear him. He was lost in the moment. A surge of energy coursed through his body, a fiery determination that burned brighter than any physical strength could ever be. The cannon quivered, and for the briefest of moments, it felt as though it might just rise, and then it dropped again, the clang of it echoing through the hall like a bomb. Jason fell to his knees, gasping for air, every inch of his body aching. But he didn't care. The other recruits resumed their taunts, but they no longer carried the same weight. Something had shifted. Jason had shown them something they hadn't expected, a glimmer of the impossible. Zorath stood in front of him, now his face unreadable. "You've surprised me," he said quietly, almost reluctantly, "but you're still far from what's needed." His eyes glinted. "Tell me, human, just how far can you really push yourself?" Jason lifted his head, locking eyes with the teacher. A fire burned in him now, one that couldn't be extinguished. The game had changed. There was no going back. And as the crowd fell silent, waiting for the next move, Jason's voice rang out, clear and resolute. "Farther than you think." The room tensed as everyone braced for the next phase of his journey. The true test had only just begun. The room was unnervingly silent as Jason stepped forward, his gaze locked on the Helix Cannon. The tension was thick, each breath a struggle as the weight of the moment pressed down on him. His muscles were still sore from the last attempt, each movement feeling like it was made of lead. But now, something inside him had shifted. He wasn't just a human trying to survive. He was a force. He was a reckoning, and this was his moment. Around him, the room was a crucible, the eyes of every recruit and instructor burning into him, their silent judgments pushing him forward. Zorath stood at the front, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Jason could feel the eyes of the other recruits drilling into his back, some hopeful, some scornful, but none of it mattered. He had passed the point of caring about their thoughts. This was about proving something greater, something that transcended the classroom, the training, and the galaxy itself. This was about defying everything they had told him he couldn't do. With a deep breath, Jason reached for the cannon again. His fingers brushed against the cold, unyielding metal. This time, he could feel it. He was no longer trying to muscle his way through. This time, he was connected to it in a way he hadn't been before. It wasn't about brute strength. It was about will. His will. He heaved, and this time the cannon didn't resist. The shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but then it began to rise inch by inch. The weight of the weapon lifted from the ground. Jason's arms screamed, his body trembling under the strain, but his focus never wavered. His breath came in ragged gasps, but he kept going. With every ounce of strength, every ounce of his resolve, he lifted. The cannon, once immovable, seemed to bend to his will. The recruits, who had previously mocked him, now stood in stunned silence. Jason's body was a battlefield, muscles quaking, skin slick with sweat. But there was something unstoppable about him now. A force that was more than the sum of his physical strength. It was his spirit. It was his refusal to back down. Zorath's eyes widened, his ever-confident demeanor faltering. For the first time since Jason had arrived, the teacher seemed shaken. The weapon, a symbol of the galaxy's most impossible challenge, was now rising in the hands of a human. Not just any human, this human. Jason's legs wobbled beneath him, his knees threatening to buckle as the cannon finally lifted high into the air. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if the very fabric of space was bending around him. There was no doubt now. The impossible was happening, but as the weapon reached its apex, something shifted. The cannon began to glow. It wasn't the soft, steady hum of energy that Jason had expected. It was violent, chaotic. The light pulsed in erratic waves, crackling with power that seemed to vibrate through the air. The weapon was no longer just a tool. It was alive. Jason's heart skipped a beat. The cannon was no longer obeying his will. It was fighting back. The light from the weapon surged, an ancient energy radiating from deep within the core of the machine. The very air seemed to tremble, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. No. Jason gasped, struggling to maintain his grip. The energy coursing from the cannon was unlike anything he had ever felt. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a force of nature, an embodiment of untold power that no one, not even the greatest warriors of the galaxy, had been able to control. And now it was turning on him. Zorath stepped forward, his earlier smugness replaced by an expression of concern. The teacher's voice, usually so cold and commanding, was now edged with urgency. "Oh, what's happening?" he demanded, more to himself than anyone else. The recruits murmured among themselves, their eyes wide with disbelief. "This shouldn't be possible," one of them whispered. Jason's body trembled violently as the cannon's power seemed to grow. The weapon was pulling him in, its energy swirling around him like a storm. It felt as though the cannon was feeding off of his own will, amplifying it, warping it into something darker. He gritted his teeth, his arms shaking with the weight of the weapon and the pressure of the force that seemed to wrap around him like chains. "What is this?" Jason muttered to himself, panic creeping into his voice. The cannon's light grew, brighter, and the room seemed to vibrate with the raw, untamed energy emanating from it. It wasn't just lifting it anymore, it was controlling him. The recruits watched in stunned silence, unsure whether to step forward or back. No one knew what to do. This had never happened before. A human lifting the weapon and now fighting against it. Zorath's voice cut through the chaos. "You must release it," he shouted, but Jason couldn't hear him over the deafening roar of the energy pulsing from the cannon. His vision blurred, his focus wavering as the power surged, threatening to tear him apart. It felt like the cannon was rejecting him, like he was no longer its master. The room grew colder, the very air crackling with static. "You have to fight it!" Zorath's voice came again, more insistent. Jason's mind was spinning, the connection between him and the weapon slipping out of his control. This was no longer a test of strength, it was a battle of wills. The weapon had been ancient, cursed, and its true power was far beyond anyone's understanding. His body screamed in agony and his grip faltered. The energy from the cannon was pulling him in, forcing him to submit. It was as if it had become a living entity, trying to drag him under, trying to break his spirit. Jason's legs buckled as the weight of the weapon and the force of its power. It bore down on him. "I won't back down," he gasped, gritting his teeth as the cannon's pulse grew stronger. The world around him blurred and his vision flickered. His heart raced, his body screaming for release, but there was no way out. The weapon was not just a tool of destruction. It was an ancient curse, tied to the very fabric of the galaxy's power. As Jason struggled, the light from the weapon flared one final time. The ground beneath him trembled, and the recruits took a step back, fearful of what was happening. The air in the room grew thick with tension, charged with an energy that seemed to promise doom. Zorath's voice was laced with a rare note of worry. "You're out of time, human." Jason's vision swam. The power of the cannon was overwhelming, its force threatening to tear him apart, but he held on, digging deeper into his resolve. If he failed now, everything he had done, everything he had fought for, would be for nothing. And then, just as he thought he might collapse under the strain, something inside him snapped. He wasn't going to fail. Not today. Not now. The cannon's power flickered for a moment, almost as though it were considering his resolve. And then, the energy began to pulse in a more controlled rhythm. Slowly, Jason regained control, his fingers tightening around the cannon's handle once again. But just as he thought he might have the upper hand, the light from the weapon flared once more, this time brighter than before, threatening to consume him entirely. Zorath stepped forward, his voice filled with foreboding. "This is not just a weapon, it is an ancient force. You're playing with powers you cannot comprehend." Jason's mind raced. The weapon was not just a test, it was something much darker and much more dangerous, and now he had no choice but to face it. The room fell into complete silence as the weapon began to glow brighter than ever before. Jason's body shook as the power surged. He was on the edge of destruction, but he had no way out. The battle wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The hum of the Helix Cannon's energy slowly died down, leaving the room in an eerie silence. Jason stood at its side, trembling, his body still tingling from the raw energy that had surged through him moments before. His hands were slick with sweat, his muscles burning with exhaustion. He could barely keep himself upright. Yet there was something else in the air now, something he had never felt before. It wasn't just the weight of the weapon, nor the exhaustion from the fight with the force that had tried to consume him. It was the weight of everything that had led him here, the doubts, the pain, the ridicule. And now, finally, a strange sense of clarity. Jason took a step back from the cannon, slowly releasing his grip on the cold metal. The weapon stood there, ominously quiet now, no longer the chaotic force it had been moments ago. He couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride. He had done it. Not just lifted the weapon, but survived it. He had wrestled with the unknown, defied the odds, and somehow come out on the other side. For the first time, Jason allowed himself to really feel what that meant. He wasn't the weak, powerless human that had walked into this room. No, he was more. He had proven that he belonged. He wasn't just an outsider in this galaxy anymore. He had a place here, and that was something he had never allowed himself to believe before. As he stood there, staring at the weapon, a faint smirk tugged at the corners of his mouth. He could hear the faint murmurs of the other recruits around him, the voices once filled with mockery, now tinged with something else. Respect. Jason took in a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs. For a moment, the entire galaxy seemed to still, and in that stillness, he found a strange peace. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for something greater, something that transcended this training ground, this academy. This was about proving to himself that he wasn't just another human destined to fade into the shadows. This was about showing the galaxy that humans had strength, courage, and resilience that no one, not even the universe's greatest warriors, could ignore. Jason's gaze shifted as he noticed movement from the corner of his eye. He turned to find Zorath, the instructor, standing just a few paces away. The teacher's posture was still rigid, but there was something different in the way he held himself. The air between them was charged with a new energy, one that wasn't filled with disdain, but a quiet respect. For the first time, Zorath wasn't looking at him with the cold, calculated judgment that had defined their every interaction. Instead, his gaze softened just slightly, and Jason could almost hear the unspoken words in the air between them. "You've done well, human," Zorath said, his voice lacking its usual contempt. There was something in his tone, a subtle change, something Jason hadn't expected. "You may not have the strength of the other warriors here, but you have something more, a will." Jason nodded slowly, still unsure of what to say. The words felt strange, but somehow they resonated with him. It was the first acknowledgement of his worth that he had ever received in this galaxy, and it was coming from the one person who had deemed him unworthy in every way imaginable. Jason opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Zorath's eyes narrowed slightly, as if considering something. "But don't be fooled," he continued, his voice lowering, a hint of warning in it. "This challenge was just a taste. The true test is yet to come." The words hung heavily in the air, a stark reminder that the battle Jason had just faced was only the beginning. The recruits around him began to murmur among themselves. There were whispers of admiration. Now their glances no longer mocking, but filled with something different, recognition. Some even nodded toward him, their previous contempt replaced with a quiet respect. The once insurmountable odds that Jason had faced seemed to have vanished in the wake of his success. And now, for the first time, Jason realized something. The battle for respect wasn't just about lifting the weapon. It was about lifting the very perception of humanity. And in that moment, he had won. But Zorath's words echoed in Jason's mind, and the weight of them hung heavy on his chest. "The true test is yet to come." Jason's gaze flickered toward the other recruits, some of whom had once openly ridiculed him, and for the first time he saw the flicker of something, perhaps even doubt, in their eyes. They had witnessed his strength, his determination, but Zorath's warning still lingered. Jason wasn't ready to let himself bask in the brief moment of victory. He couldn't afford to. Not yet. The room was quiet again, as if holding its breath for what came next. Jason took another deep breath, his hands steadying as the adrenaline of the battle began to wear off. He could feel the weight of his body aching, the battle inside of him still raging, but he knew he had to focus. The next step, whatever it was, would determine everything. Zorath's gaze remained fixed on him, no longer full of ridicule, but something else, something colder, more calculating. "You've proven that you are capable of more than we thought," he said quietly, as if weighing each word carefully. "But don't get comfortable. The path ahead will be more dangerous than you could possibly imagine. And this," he gestured vaguely to the cannon, "was just the beginning." Jason's chest tightened at Zorath's words, but he didn't falter. "I'm ready," he said firmly, meeting the instructor's gaze. Zorath studied him for a moment before nodding slowly, his face unreadable. "We'll see," he replied before turning away. As Jason watched him walk off, the weight of the warning settled in. The cannon had been just a taste, a glimpse into what lay ahead. He had proven himself today, but there was no doubt in his mind. This challenge, this test was far from over, and yet something inside him had shifted. For the first time, he was no longer fighting just to survive. He was fighting to prove that humanity had a place in this galaxy, a place that no one could deny. The journey ahead would be fraught with danger, and he didn't know what awaited him on the other side. But one thing was certain. He was no longer afraid. The final test loomed, and with it, the promise of something far greater than he had ever imagined. The galaxy was vast, and it was watching, and Jason Hale was ready to rise. The room was still. The Helix Cannon, once a towering, indomitable force that had defied every warrior who came before it, now lay subdued at Jason's feet. He stood, breathing heavily, sweat dripping down his face, his body aching from the ordeal. The cannon's glow had dimmed. The pulsating energy that had threatened to consume him now reduced to a faint hum, as if the weapon itself had been exhausted from the struggle. But even in its dormant state, the weapon carried an air of quiet menace. Jason looked down at the massive construct, his chest heaving. He wasn't unscathed. The battle had taken its toll. His muscles burned with the effort, and his body still trembled from the chaos of the power struggle. Yet something had shifted. The impossible had been conquered. The weight of his success wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, something that resonated in his very bones. He had proven that he wasn't just a weak human among giants. He was a force in his own right. The weapon's true purpose had been revealed, a purpose far beyond what anyone had initially understood. It had chosen him, and in doing so, it had bestowed upon him a power that transcended the ordinary. The realization hit him like a wave. He wasn't just a recruit anymore. He wasn't just a human fighting to prove himself. He had been marked. The power that surged through him now was not of his own making, but of something ancient, something far older and more complex than he could comprehend. Jason stood there, caught between triumph and uncertainty. What did this power mean? How would it affect his future? And more importantly, how would it shape the future of the entire galaxy? The responsibility that came with it was staggering. He wasn't sure he was ready to wield it, but the choice was no longer his. He was marked for something greater. His place in the universe had changed, and with it, the stakes of his journey had grown immeasurably higher. As he took a step back, the weight of the moment settled in. He was about to leave the hall, to walk away from this test and begin whatever came next, but Zorath's voice stopped him. "You've done well," Zorath said, his tone almost begrudging. But there was something else there, a hint of respect, perhaps even admiration. "But the galaxy is on the brink of something much greater. You have no idea what this power means. It's not just a test for you, it's a calling." Jason turned to face him, confusion flickering in his eyes. "A calling?" Zorath's expression darkened. "This weapon, it's more than just a test of strength. It's been waiting for someone like you, someone with the potential to change the course of the galaxy. But the power it grants is not just for you. It will pull you into something much bigger, something beyond your comprehension." Jason took a step forward, the words hanging heavy in the air. "What are you saying?" Zorath paused, his gaze shifting to the cannon and then back to Jason. "There's a war coming, a war that will shake the very foundations of the universe. The forces behind it are ancient, and their reach extends far beyond what any of us have ever known. And you? You're going to be part of it, whether you want to or not. This weapon, this power, it's only the beginning. Your strength is needed. The galaxy will soon call on you, and you will have to decide where you stand. The question is, will you be ready?" The words hit Jason like a thunderclap. A war, a force beyond comprehension. He had barely begun to understand the power he had been given, and now Zorath was telling him it was part of something much bigger, much more dangerous. The uncertainty of it all loomed in front of him, but something inside him shifted. The stakes had always been high, but now they were far beyond anything he had imagined. His journey was far from over. It was only just beginning. As Zorath turned to leave, Jason's gaze lingered on the cannon, the weight of the weapon's power still pulsing in the air. He wasn't just a human recruit anymore. He had been chosen for something greater than he could fully understand. The question now wasn't whether he could handle the power. The real question was whether he could handle what came next. What would he become? What role would humanity play in the future of the galaxy? He took one last look at the Helix Cannon, and a quiet resolve settled in. Whatever happened, whatever came next, he would face it head-on. He had proven himself. He was ready, and as he stepped away from the weapon, a new chapter of his journey began. The galaxy, with all its unknowns, awaited him. But one thing was certain. Jason Hale was no longer just a recruit. He was a force to be reckoned with. And the universe would soon know his name. The future was open to limitless possibilities, and Jason, for the first time, felt like he could shape it.